Hi there, and welcome back to the Sanjay Says podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about my own history with mental disorders, and specifically, yes, I have bipolar disorder. Acceptance is the key to happiness and to solutions. Read my red, turn the page. Sanjay's words, they pave the way. I was 30 years old when I started a company to make a mobile device that would send and receive emails a few years before the BlackBerry came out. If you're watching on video, here's the actual device. This used to be a functioning one. You can see it's a Palm Pilot with a cradle that has power and charging in it, and this big ass antenna and a data modem. It was brilliant, and it's only like a little. It looks huge here beside my head, but it's about the same size as an iPhone Plus nowadays. So I built a talented team of engineers and marketers. AT&T and US Robotics were partners. I had a working prototype. I had customers signed up. One friend told me over lunch, Sanjay, it's like there's a light glowing from inside you. I was also only sleeping 3 hours a night. I was spending money on parties and five-star hotels instead of on product development. I was financing all of this out of a joint savings account without telling my wife by maxing out cash advances on a half dozen credit cards. In 6 short months, I crashed the company and I crashed into a deep depression. On the surface, it was a result of bad cash management and a lack of focus, but the real story was a bit darker. I had to declare personal bankruptcy to wipe out $550,000 in debt. I got divorced, and at age 31, I moved back in with my parents. I had a 3-year-old daughter that I wasn't seeing, and I wasn't making child support payments. It was not pretty. Despite the carnage that I had created, I built a cocoon of peace in the bedroom that I grew up in, sleeping 14 hours a day, reading, and eating my mom's home cooking. After a month of this, my lack of interest in returning to society and moving out of the house got my parents worried enough to send me to a psychiatrist. Dr. Jamal took copious notes during a 1-hour session and came back with a diagnosis that I was not only depressed, but that I might be manic-depressive or bipolar. I was taken aback and denied it. No. Manic-depressives are crazy. I wasn't crazy. On the other hand, the depression diagnosis meant I wasn't lazy either. In fact, it was a great defense for all the times that I didn't feel like getting out of bed. And side note, it's common with bipolar disorder for patients to seek help only with the depression cycle. The manic side is a destructive one where you lose relationships and go bankrupt, but it's also fun. My parents encouraged me to try various non-traditional treatments, including wearing a copper bracelet, keeping a lucky gem in my pocket, and seeking treatment by a yogi from India. Dad, seriously? A yogi from India? He's not coming just for me, is he? No, son. He's here to run some Hindu temple sessions. He'll be staying with us at the house, though, and you should let him help you. Okay, fine. I'll try it, but not if I have to do yoga. I hate yoga. 2 days later, the yogi shows up and tells my father, I will sleep directly beneath your son. Look at his picture and think cleansing thoughts. That will help him get better. After the yogi was settled in a bedroom 1 floor beneath me, my father came into my room and asked, son, could you sleep on your left side of your bed so that the yogi can sleep in the bed below you instead of having to sleep on the floor? I scooted over to the other side of the bed, went to sleep. I didn't get better. But the yogi's temple got a nice donation from my family anyway. 3 months later, I came out of the depression the same way I always had, gradually feeling better after getting lots of sleep. I got a great job in sales and began to work my way back from bankruptcy. Unfortunately, I continued to suffer from what I considered to be depression cycles. I tried several medications over 5 years: lithium, Wellbutrin, Celexa, Effexor. Of them all, only Effexor worked, but it had side effects that made me stop taking it. In my case, lack of pleasure in sex. I was fortunate that I had a job with a lot of flexibility and an understanding boss. So I was able to have a somewhat normal life, but I was prone to fits of anger and had problematic relationships with my colleagues, alternating with periods where I would cancel meetings and just stay in bed all day. My parents continued to worry. My ongoing depression cycles were interspersed with brief periods of over-the-top enthusiasm, and a few weeks after a disastrous Las Vegas gambling trip where I lost $30,000 playing poker. That's a story I'm going to have to write about one of these days. I received a message from my father. He had gotten the name of a leading mental disorder specialist in Boston and had emailed him asking, can you help my son? The specialist replied that he couldn't get involved in a Canadian case, but suggested I get in touch with a colleague in Toronto, Dr. Sagar Parikh. Dad then forwarded that email to Dr. Parikh and asked him to take me on, which Parikh would never have done, but he did on the strength of the referral from Boston. not realizing that the Boston doctor had no idea who I was. When I got the message about seeing Dr. Parikh, I called my father and said, Dad, I got your referral email, but I don't see the point of another specialist. I've decided that psychiatrists are all quacks who couldn't get into a real specialty. Side note, my daughter is now a talented and dedicated psychiatrist. I have revised my opinion. My father patiently said, Son, I've been speaking with Dr. Jamal, and he still thinks that you might be bipolar. I know you don't want to hear it, but maybe it would help to talk to Dr. Parikh about it. I want you to go see him, please. I provided Dr. Parikh with all the details about the lead up to my bankruptcy, which I actually hadn't done before. Since he was a renowned researcher, I believed he would recognize that I wasn't bipolar if he had all the details, and that he would help dismiss any notion that I was manic-depressive. But Parikh's diagnosis was immediate. Sanjay, you're bipolar 1, the most serious form of the disorder. I know you don't think you're bipolar because there's only been the one obvious incident, but from your history, I believe there are several others, just not as severe and not as recognizable. The diagnosis, though, is always based on the most severe episode. I insisted, but I can't be bipolar. I'm not crazy. No, you're not crazy, he said. Being manic-depressive is a chemical imbalance, like many mental disorders. It can be treated and it can be managed. I can't force you to take the medication. You have to make that decision yourself. Side note, most clinicians now believe that mental disorders are not caused by a chemical imbalance, but are a body's natural response to a traumatic situation. And medicines can definitely help, but also treating the original trauma can help more. Back to Dr. Parikh, I negotiated in an attempt to avoid medication. I said, look, I was excited about my business idea. That's why it was such a severe episode. Maybe I'm only bipolar 2, hypomanic. And Parikh just stared at me. Okay, I'm bipolar. Can you help me? I asked. And he said, I see from your medical record that you had a negative reaction to lithium when you took it. Here's a prescription for something called lamotrigine. He handed me a sheet of paper and said, it's an anti-epileptic medication that's been found to be effective in treating bipolar disorder. Let's give it a try. And side note, back then, lamotrigine as a treatment for bipolar was completely novel. That's why nobody had ever suggested it to me before. But it's now the gold standard for treating bipolar disorder, which features a lot of long depressive cycles. So I took the medicine for 2 weeks, no side effects, but no effects either. And then on the 15th day, I woke up and suddenly I felt a hell of a lot better. I saw Parikh again and he said, okay, come see me if you encounter any problems and good luck. I only saw Dr. Parikh one more time, 20 years later. He had moved on in his career and was doing research in the US, but was visiting Toronto to attend a conference. I had recently sold my company and I met him for the sole purpose of thanking him for what he had done for me all those years ago and to let him know that I was not doing just well, but pretty damn great. I was still embarrassed about my diagnosis though. And when I met the woman who was to become my wife, I didn't mention that I was bipolar. I told myself that I didn't have to talk about it because it was no longer an issue, that I had it under control. But really, I still felt stigmatized. I didn't want to admit that there was something wrong with my head. After we were married and she asked me about the various medications I was taking, mostly for heart disease, I finally confessed. She wasn't happy that I had hidden it from her. As I've become more successful, I've opened up more about my difficulties and my mental struggles. My bipolar disorder doesn't define me. If anything, I'm defined by getting past it. There is nothing more important than your health. It should always be your number one priority. And in addressing health issues, you should always start with mental health because warped feelings and thoughts can only lead towards self-destruction, not towards self-improvement. Put on your own mask first and then help others. If you've had challenges with mental health, tell your story. You'll be helping to reduce stigma and spread solutions. In my case, talking about bipolar disorder and depression has allowed many people over the years to approach me, admit they have the same problems, and ask for help. Because there is one message that we all need to hear before we can get better, that we are not alone. Final note, I now keep a journal, meditate, and do yoga. These practices keep me balanced and grounded, but it required years of psychedelic and internal family systems therapy to get me into these habits. And I've written about these and talked about that in the past. I wasn't able to get directly to these mindful practices from my earlier, less mindful self. I'm a proponent of psychedelics, but with bipolar disorder, they are sometimes considered to be dangerous because they might trigger a manic episode. Medicated on lamotrigine or not, I have not found this to be the case, and there are no known episodes in clinical trials of someone with bipolar disorder going into psychosis or mania as a result. It is a fear, not a fact. Do your own research. I'm not a doctor. Stay safe. Thanks for listening to this episode of Sanjay Says. Tune in next week for more stories about how I've messed up my life that'll help you mess up yours a little bit less. Remember, do as I say, not as I do.